I'm David Bell. I'm a public health physician, originally from Australia. Worked in the World Health Organization and for Global Good Fund in Seattle in the past, and I work in biotech and in global health. I co-chaired with Ramesh Thakur the International Health Reform Project, where we're looking at what has gone wrong with the World Health Organization, why it's drifted from its original remit, which was really to address the major determinants of health, high burden diseases, and address particularly the health problems of poor countries, low income countries, where people die a lot earlier, and how it has drifted to really now be almost a work for hire scheme for large pharmaceutical corporations. And in particular how it's been bending the data and bending messaging to convince countries to use their money to support this scheme. So the emphasis now is on health security. We're seeing recurrent outbreaks. Since COVID, we've had hantavirus and Nipah virus, a couple of outbreaks of avian influenza. It's back now in Australia, etc., and Ebola. And these are things that happen all the time. We have technology now that allows us to be much better at detecting them and distinguishing them from the background of infectious diseases, which is declining overall despite the messaging. So this is being used, and very small outbreaks are being used to create a constant fear in the population, a sense of existential crisis, that if pandemics are increasing, outbreaks are increasing. The data does not show this, although this is what WHO messaging is showing. Their own data shows that this is not the case, that there are, particularly we're just detecting them better. And the infectious disease and outbreak mortality has been dropping over the last century, and the trend is continuing in that direction. As you would expect, as society gets better and economics gets better, and we have better health care. So we're interested in going back to the basis of human rights in medicine, to an evidence-based approach to public health, and coming up with a model of international health cooperation which would be based on this. And then we've compared the WHO with this, and we've produced two reports, the Right to Health Sovereignty Technical Report and Policy Report, which talk about how the WHO has drifted from this ethical, evidence-based approach, and the need to have international cooperation, multilateral cooperation in health, but to base it on these principles, which are really based on the idea of individual sovereignty, of national sovereignty, where individuals are represented collectively at an international stage, and of having international organizations that are based on the voluntary participation and under the control of those states, rather than of private entities and the other influences that have taken WHO from what was once a very important, useful organization and pushed it into really a tool of large corporations and for-profit pharmaceutical sector.
Just to add to and reinforce the points that David was making, we don't believe that the WHO, as it is structured today and as it operates today, is fit for purpose for today's real health challenges. If that is the case, what is the central organizing principle around which we should redesign the structure, the funding, the personnel policies, its mission? What we find over its 80 years odd of existence is a combination of mission creep, where the original mission has been added to with additional functions that supposedly help it to meet the original mission. But in addition, there are added missions that have also been put on its agenda. And over time, these reflect the priorities of the major donors, which direct the WHO as to what its programs and activities should be over the coming couple of years or longer. And that is a distortion of the health needs of the world's people and the best responses for promoting global health. So what we need to do is study how the prospects for reforming an international organization, whether they are good or bad, how we should go about it, who are the state champions we need, how do we combat the drift of authority from states, national states, to international organizations. Because one of the major costs of that has been a decline in the legitimacy of states themselves and an alienation of the people from their own governments, who feel that governments no longer represent them, no longer listen to them, and are instead increasingly subordinating their own citizens' preferences and priorities to the edicts and commands coming from international organizations. And hence we have seen the backlash and a very strong backlash against global governance, against globalization, and an insistence that governments start reflecting their people's, their country's needs and aspirations, and cut back effectively many international organizations, cut them back down to size again as well. In terms of how UN reform system works, overqualified. I've been involved in that. I wrote Kofi Annan's 2002 UN reform report. I wrote jointly with Gareth Evans, our former foreign minister, a report for an international commission called The Responsibility to Protect, which was actually one of the few that got adopted unanimously by heads of government meeting at a World Summit in the United Nations in 2005. And the report came out in 2001, sorry. So I have experienced that, I have experienced success in that, and have some knowledge and experience of how you go about trying to maximize the prospects of successful reform initiatives and how you go about avoiding the pitfalls and the perils that end up in a stalemate. With the United States having pulled out, it lost its biggest state donor. So now, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, you have the Gates Foundation as the biggest donor, followed by Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which also gets a substantial chunk of its funding from Gates. So that gives them two points of entry into influencing the WHO agenda. Then you have the European Commission, and I think the fourth biggest funder is Germany. So you're looking down to the World Bank and then Germany. So you're looking at fourth or fifth biggest funder as a state government funder rather than they being the dominant funder. This public-private partnership was a good idea in principle when it originated at the end of the Cold War, and the United Nations opened up to ideological, with a change in dominant ideology, the United Nations opened itself up to working with the private sector. But by now, we've corrupted that essentially into privatizing the profits and socializing the risks and distorting the health agenda globally. So the three pathologies are not that hard to document and show, and we need to reverse that. So those who have the money set the agenda and priorities.
I mean, 75% or 80% now of the World Health Organization's budget is specified, and all the private money is specified. So that means the funder tells the World Health Organization what it will do with that money, where, when, and with whom. So they are setting the agenda. So the World Health Assembly, which is a conference of countries, can set overall policy and discuss this, but on the ground, the donors, the funders, now determine exactly what the World Health Organization will do. So when they are private, and when the Gavi is a public-private partnership, it's the second largest funder. The Gates Foundation is a big investor in pharmaceutical, in manufacturing. Then a private company has to look after its shareholders and look after its profits. That's why pharmaceutical corporations get involved in this. That's their job. The job of the CEO of Pfizer, his job is to maximize return on investment for his shareholders. It is not to deal with children in Malawi and perhaps improve their nutrition and improve their pneumonia outcomes. So that's someone else's job. So what we've done is taken down the barriers to conflict of interest that we used to have, and we've put these pharmaceutical corporations with their requirement to maximise profit in the driving seat of global health. So it's no longer populations, which it was originally through the countries and the national governments and the World Health Assembly. It's now overwhelmingly the private donors of WHO and specific countries who have very large pharmaceutical sectors, and so have a vested interest in pushing WHO towards a certain type of public health rather than necessarily addressing the fundamental determinants of health that have better outcomes overall.
To be better informed, they could begin by reading our two reports. It's set out to be accessible to an average, not necessarily very well informed, but still interested audience of readers. And they will get all the information and the data. In terms of what we can do, we have traditionally been active through middle power diplomacy in forming coalitions with other like-minded states and with civil society. I think we would have the capacity and the credibility to potentially play a leading and active role in re-establishing global health cooperation on a better basis, so that the returns on public investment reflect better public health outcomes with improved life expectancy and decreased illnesses of a major type for many more people in the world, rather than maximizing profit for pharmaceutical actors.
Yeah, I mean, really educate themselves about, you know, what are the causes of disease, the causes of mortality. It's not niche, it's not 2 or 3 people dying from an avian influenza outbreak or a hantavirus outbreak. It's non-communicable diseases, it's the tuberculosis on a global stage and malaria, those sorts of diseases. And understanding the incentives, which it's not complicated. It's just human behaviour, and it's the way private sector works. If you take down the barriers and you let the regulations be diluted, you take out the conflict of interest, this is what happens. So understand what has happened at an international level, and that it's not some sort of conspiracy theory or it's just what you would expect in day-to-day life. It's why we have barriers to conflict of interest in our public life. It's why if you're running the local Red Cross Society, there are rules on what you can say and what you can't say, what you do, what you don't do. So don't overcomplicate it, and recognise that the people who are part of this process and whose incentives are to keep this going for their own salaries are not necessarily the people who are best placed to give you advice. But often your own judgment, your own common sense is what is most important.